Hi, this is Alina, and you're listening to Your PharmD Bestie. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Your PharmD Bestie. We have a very special guest today, Valerie from UCSF, to share some of her experiences in pharmacy school. The episode today, we are aiming to cover more of some advice and insight onto OSCEs. You've probably heard of it, stands for Objective Structured Clinical Exams. And it's a way to test pharmacy students on their clinical skills through standardized patient encounters. So throughout the episode, you might hear us saying like SP, that just stands for like standardized patients. And depending on your school, they might hire people to come be those patients to test you on particular topics and disease states, but we'll dive into that more. Brief recap of episode 2. Previously, I had some discussions about preparing for pharmacy school applications. So again, if you have any follow-up questions regarding that process, feel free to reach out through our social media pages, DM us with your questions, and do my best to answer. All right, so I'll pass it back to Valerie to introduce herself.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me on. My name is Valerie. I am in my third year, also my last year of pharmacy school at UCSF. My current interests are pursuing a residency in acute care, um, but I've really just immersed myself in UCSF in all shapes, sizes, and forms. I was really involved in a lot of leadership, such as SNAFA, SNPHA, CSHP, which is the California Society of Health System Pharmacists, and some other things as well. I've been involved with the school's orientation team as well as the tutoring team. And lastly, I've also had the privilege of being an intern for Benioff Children's Hospital. So that's kind of a little bit about me, but I'm excited to kind of dive into these OSCEs and talk about my pharmacy school experience.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. As you can tell, listeners, we have a very well qualified guest to come speak on these topics. And um, as an upperclassman, I can definitely say that Valerie is very involved, and I think that she has a lot of great advice and skills for listeners to take in. And she's a great role model. So we'll kind of talk about this later, but if she wants to like share contact or something, but totally fine. Like I think that she'll be someone great to look up to and ask questions as well. So we'll dive into what OSCEs are and what they look like. So for this episode specifically, since we both came from UCSF, there might be some like bias. Maybe it's not like as generalized to all pharmacy schools, but we'll do our best to kind of just talk about how we prepared for it, because I think that should be applicable to any situation for anyone who's preparing for these OSCEs. So as mentioned briefly, at UCSF, our curriculum is set up in a way where each block focuses on a specific body part, like disease states for that body part. So for example, if you're in your cardiology block, at the very end of that block, you will have an OSCE to test more of your clinical skills related to how well you can counsel a patient on their cardiology meds, as an example. So that being said, Valerie, as a third year, she's had 2 years of full didactic experience. Can I ask, when you first heard about OSCEs, what was your impression about what it was?
Yeah, so OSCEs, I think when I first heard about them as a P1, so my first year of pharmacy school, I was definitely really intimidated because the whole concept is to be able to assess a pharmacy student or any healthcare student, really, because this is common in med school as well and other professions. But it's really just to test your clinical knowledge and assess where you are in the moment. During these encounters, you don't really have access to any resources such as like your laptop or your phone. This is pretty much straight from your head. So that I think was probably the scariest thing, just kind of navigating and feeling like, do I actually know everything? Will I be able to recall everything? Um, but it's a relatively short encounter. I believe ours were only about 12 minutes,
Hmm.
not including the time you get to read the door note, which is what the case is and what the objective of today's session is. Um, so overall, I was definitely a little bit scared going into it because that's a lot of pressure, just to go in and have an encounter and be able to spew out as much knowledge as you can about this one particular thing that you don't know the subject of beforehand. As Alina mentioned previously, like for example, for us, if we were in our cardio block, we knew it would be something relating to cardio.
Hmm.
But as all of you health professionals know, there are so many things in this one theme. It's hard to guess or pinpoint what the subject may be on. So it's really just about, have you been keeping up with the material throughout the block? Have you been able to just look at a question and be able to digest it and then find out what they're actually asking?
Yeah, definitely agree. It's been a little bit further back for me, but I remember like even before applying to pharmacy school, I briefly remember like hearing about OSCEs and I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to be worried too much about that right now, but it sounds scary. My impression was like we'll be stuck in a room with a patient and whatever happens in that room like happens and then I just have to like deal with it. So it's kind of like that, but a little more structured. And something else that I think we should mention is that there is a rubric from the school side to kind of assess maybe the more important points that they want you to address during the patient encounters. Um, I personally don't quite remember my first OSCE. I think, was it back in foundations? Did we have an OSCE for that?
Yeah, I believe it was a med rec, also
Okay.
known as a medication reconciliation.
Yeah, you're right. Now I remember. That was nerve-wracking enough because I was creating lists, just like repeatedly writing down all the steps to take a med history so that I wouldn't forget anything, as you mentioned. Um, I also actually had the privilege to be a patient for a recent OSCE this past year at UCSF. So it was for the P1s, so it was their first OSCE ever. And I was shocked to see how nervous they were. Um, and it just reminded me of myself as a P1. Like, I don't quite remember how nervous I was, but I felt so bad for the students. I was like, oh no, like, this is broadly speaking, when you look back at the encounters, like, as you mentioned, it's 12 minutes long. You do your best to prepare for it. And the whole objective is to one, like ensure that you have an understanding of what you're counseling the patients on, but two, also really just seeing how well you can interact with patients. So I think that's something that people tend to forget when they go into an OSCE is that just like your people skills matters a lot. I'm sure you mentioned that you also were very nervous when you first approached your first OSCE. Did you have any methods or ways that helped you like overcome that nerve for your next few OSCEs?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I kind of wanted to circle back to about what you were saying about the people skills, because the OSCE is not only just a way to assess your clinical skills, but also something that I like to call soft skills. And these are kind of about your body language, the way your tone is, the way you're speaking to someone, because
Mhm.
all of those things matter too. And, I've never seen the rubric, but from what I can assume, some of these soft skills, like your communication, your empathy, your tone, all of these things are probably somewhere in that rubric to kind of round you out. Because you can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you're not approachable and if you're not being able to relay that in an appropriate way to a patient, it may not come off well. So going back to your question about what I did to prepare for future OSCEs, what really helps me is to be able to brain dump on a document, like a Word document or a Google Doc, as to what I would exactly say in that situation and think of different scenarios. I like to create kind of a skeleton, like, okay, this is what my intro is going to be. This is how I'm going to ask them about their current medications, any side effects, they're taking their meds, they're taking their meds. And then try to think of scenarios. Like if they tell me this about this med, I'm going to counsel them on X, Y, and Z.
Mm.
For example, we've been talking a lot about cardio, and one big cardio drug that a lot of pharmacy students like to think about are statins, which help with dyslipidemia. So I think in my head, like, okay, if they're going to ask me about a statin and I ask them about side effects, and if they tell me that they're having muscle pains, I'm immediately going to know like what that may be attributed to because I was able to create that skeleton ahead of time and proactively think, what could they possibly be asking? The school was nice enough to give us sort of like options as to what stations we could have. I think it was probably about 6 stations.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they'll tell us, like, oh, you may have a station based on anticoagulants or antiplatelets or statins or heart failure or anything like that. So we'll kind of have a general ballpark idea of what to expect. But because of that, you kind of have to expect the unexpected, like really do your due diligence on all of the subjects that the school offers you as to what you may be tested on and really dive deep and think about what you could possibly be doing because, this is supposed to mimic what a real life interaction is like. So when a patient in the real world is coming up to you and telling you, hey, I'm having X, Y, and Z problem, it's up to us to kind of use our critical thinking skills in that moment to decide what the next step is. So yeah, for any student that's currently doing OSCEs, I recommend kind of creating a skeleton of what your intro would be, how you're going to med them and take a very deep history on them, and then think of possible scenarios that may happen and what your plan would be in that case.
Yeah, that's all really wonderful advice. Very well said too, and I agree. I had a similar approach to preparing for OSCEs, just I think being as prepared as you can for really any scenario possible will be your best bet to feel as confident as you can going in, and then just to address the aspect of experiencing nerves like right before. I used to tell myself every single time before I entered the door that it's only 12 minutes, actually less than that. And so in reality, 12 minutes is like the time for me to finish half of like my boba drink. It goes by really fast. So whatever happens will happen. And I think that also I think it's lucky for us that UCSF is like pass no pass because there is an opportunity to retake an OSCE. If, for example, you miss points and you don't do as well as you expected yourself to. So I think reminding yourself and giving yourself some grace too in that aspect, especially if you're someone who maybe does experience a lot of anxiety with exams and kind of like standardized processes like this, just, be nice to yourself. Sometimes things happen, and I believe that with better preparation, you can always do better the next time too. So always look forward. Um, and so I think when, like, of course, mentally preparing yourself and calming yourself before the actual encounter, and two, just remembering that it's not the end of the world if the encounter itself doesn't go well. Do you have anything that you want to add to that?
Yeah, we're really lucky to be in a pass no pass school. But I assume with other types of grading curriculums, you probably have more than one chance to redeem yourself if it didn't go the way that you wanted it to. So be easy on yourself because in the grand scheme of things, you're all going to get to the same goal. So just be easy on yourself.
Yeah, and that actually reminds me, like one more thing is that I think having experienced didactics and OSCEs and then going into my clinical appy years, I think that no matter how much you try to replicate an actual patient scenario, once you actually have that experience with a real patient, you'll look back and understand the point of the OSCEs, but also realize that there are a lot of digressions in terms of things that could happen. And so your goal is or should be to do your best during the OSCEs and just understand the objective, which is one to prepare you for actual patient scenarios in the future or patient encounters in the future. So that being said, I kind of want to move on to another type of exam during pharmacy school. So those are our pharmacy school exams. After each block, usually we have a summative. And so a summative is one final exam where they test you on basically everything you learned that block. Um, and there's usually just one exam for the entire block, if I remember correctly, but in between, from the beginning to the end of the block, there are assignments to kind of test you on your knowledge and prepare you for those exams. But um, because I am a year out from pharmacy school, I think it would be valuable to ask Valerie what the pharmacy school exams look like at a pass, no pass school and how they are graded if she is aware or happens to know.
Yeah, definitely. So, being in this curriculum, as Alina had mentioned, we have therapeutic blocks, and depending on how lengthy the block is, you may have one exam or more than one exam throughout the block. It just depends on how much material is in there. But an exam for us looks like a 3 hour time period, and it's typically revolved around a patient case. So you may have multiple patient cases in an exam and then many questions about that particular patient case. And it's really just to assess your knowledge and see if you really understand the material. One thing I really like that our faculty and professors do at our school is create these learning objectives for us. And they're pretty much like guided study questions. So, in preparation for these exams, I would go through all the learning objectives and see if I can answer them, which is another way for me to test my knowledge. Because on the exam, they form the questions based on the learning objectives. So, that's why it's really important to be able to have a good understanding of each block's learning objectives. Can I fully answer it? Or am I just regurgitating the information and memorizing? There's a big difference between how you memorize things and then how you fully understand it. Um, and as Alina mentioned, there's assignments throughout the block that help us to prepare for it. They are called formatives, and they're not graded based on your performance. They're graded based on completion, which should give you the motivation to say, I really want to test my knowledge and see how well I can do on these practically ungraded. Because as long as you turn something in, you'll get credit for it, right? But what's important is being able to take that opportunity and really sit down and test yourself. And these things were, do I want to say about once a week throughout the block, maybe once every other week if it was a slower week. But it's just an opportunity for you to test yourself and just put yourself in that test taking setting and see if you can really answer the questions without really having any penalties because like I mentioned, it's not graded based on your performance. It's just graded based on completion. So it's a great opportunity for students to learn.
Yeah, that's bringing back some memories of the formatives. Totally agree. I think it's easy to get caught up with life sometimes. And so definitely encourage you just do your best to take that opportunity to practice before the exams. Sometimes you will feel the need to just do the bare minimum and submit it. But again, it's an opportunity for you to practice. I also really like how you brought up the learning objectives. I personally struggled with the pharmacy school exams when I first came in. My first year, I had to change my entire way of studying. I'm usually more of like grind, study hard. I will read everything, write notes, rewrite notes until like it's ingrained in me. But I think when you're at this level of education where these things matter for your career and for your patients, it's so important to make sure that you understand the material. And so for me, one way that I had to change my study habit was actually, as you said, really focus on those learning objectives. And what helped for me too was finding a friend or just someone who I could word vomit everything I knew about the learning objectives to the best of my ability. And if I was missing something, they would then bounce back like, hey, what about this aspect? Um, so really being able to verbally explain and teach someone else the concept and the learning objectives is also another great way to prepare for these exams. Now, this can be a sensitive topic. I've had to retake exams for pharmacy school. And I remember the first time I had to do that, I was devastated. I was thinking, oh my gosh, maybe like pharmacy isn't meant for me, or maybe like I won't be able to succeed as a pharmacist because I have to retake this exam. And at UCSF, the policy is 3 retakes. And if you don't pass by the third time, generally, depending on the situation, you might have to repeat that block. Um, So I don't know if you've had experiences with retakes, or if you perhaps have any advice on how to overcome those nerve blocks when it comes to retaking exams.
For sure. I have had to retake one exam, and I remember the moment I found out that I had to retake it. Nothing will replace that memory of me opening my phone and using Face ID to open Microsoft Outlook and getting that email. Um, it definitely was a big, big shock to me. I felt like I had prepared very well. I was so confused and I was honestly in denial. I was like, this has to be a mistake.
Mhm.
Um, it is, it definitely in that moment, it feels so like a jab in your heart. And it feels like, oh man, like I worked so hard. Like, how did this not pay off? Um, so in that moment, I had to reflect and think about like why I was in this position and why is this happening to me? And at that moment, I honestly had just spread myself out so thin among many, many opportunities that I took on at pharmacy school. And I believe this will happen at pretty much any school, but you can really involve yourself and really not just do school, but also a lot of other things too. And in this time, I had to really reflect and think like, what do I need to focus on? What is going to change this, you know? But I totally get what you mean in that in the moment it just feels like the end of the world. When you come out of it successful, you definitely feel like you're on top of the world. But I think that that experience for me really just taught me better time management skills. It gave me an assessment of what I can fully handle on my plate, not just as a student, but as a person too, because, outside of pharmacy school, I'm a human. I have a life and I have hobbies that I like to do. So it's really just being able to sit back and think, okay, what needs to change? What's going wrong? And also leaning on my support system. Alina was mentioning, being able to meet up with friends and trying to test each other. Um, a great leader once told me that you are nothing without your support system. So, in the times where I was really struggling, I was leaning on my support system, um, not only for academic stuff, but also for my professional stuff too. Like, if for my involvements, um, I would ask my partners or people in the organization with me, hey, I'm going through a really tough time right now. Do you think you can support me by helping me with this outreach, helping me with these emails? There's people out there who want you to succeed and will uplift you and support you when you need it. And I think it's really important to lean into that and to use your support system because there's this saying that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. I recommend go far, go together because this is a marathon.
Sorry, I'm like kind of speechless because that's a lot of wisdom. And I have to completely agree. And I think especially majority of us who are going through pharmacy school in our 20s, yeah, there's just so much that happens outside of academics. And so lean on your support system while you're going through pharmacy school because there will inevitably be challenges along the way. And remember that there's always a brighter light at the end of the tunnel. Um, so totally agree. I feel like there's not much for me to add because I think you said all of that so graciously. So I think for listeners, if you do have like follow-up questions, or maybe you're just having like a particularly hard time navigating how to move forward with exams, or if you feel like you're stuck, just, always feel free to reach out. We are coming from a space where we've gone through that. We've experienced a lot of the same things, and um, we want to help. So I'll be there to listen to whatever you want to talk about. That being said, there were some questions from social media and emails that I got. This is kind of sidetracking, segueing from away from like OSCEs and exam preparations, but more about the pharmacy school application process. And I think this might be applicable for you too, Valerie, since you are in the process of applying for not pharmacy school, but residency. What are some of your thoughts on applying to as many schools as you can to increase your chances of getting in?
That's a great question. I think that is a double-edged sword because, on one hand, statistically speaking, if you have more options, that will for sure increase your chance. That's just a fact. On the other hand, which is where my opinions kind of lean towards, I would say don't apply to somewhere where you really cannot see yourself going. And that's also the same mindset I'm having with residency applications right now. If I get an acceptance from somewhere, will I be willing to go there? Not only just to the school, but also to the location. Um, as we've been talking about support system, that's really important too. Some people are very independent and can fly solo and can move to a brand new place without their support system, which power to you. I have some of my best friends in pharmacy school. They kind of did that where they uprooted their life and moved to San Francisco, and their families, their partners, their home friends are thousands of miles away. That's awesome that they can do that. And I really admire their independence. For me and for my own mental health, I know that I'm someone who really needs all of the people in my life, not just my family, but my friends, my childhood best friends, my undergrad best friends, my partner. There's a lot of psychosocial factors that go into where I choose where I want to go. So I really think about that. And that's a big part as to where where I think I would apply because not only are you spending all your time writing your application materials and preparing yourself for it, it's also a lot of money. The
Mhm.
stuff is not cheap to be sending these application materials. So, on one hand, as I mentioned earlier, if you apply to more, does it increase your chances? Perhaps, yeah. But on the other hand, will you actually go if you get that yes? So that's something that you should really reflect on yourself and think about that and think wholeheartedly. Do you love the program? Will it prepare you for postgraduate opportunities such as residency, fellowship, or going into the workforce? And will you be supported? So those are the really big three things I can think of. On top of that, I would say what would be good to quote unquote increase your chances is try to look at the program's website and look at the statistics from the average applicant. You know, every application is not just about numbers, and I totally want to highlight that. You know, it's also about your interview, it's about your
Mhm.
letters of recs and whatnot. But a big part of it is also, you know, what does the average applicant look like? Have they completed a degree in this particular major? Did they have a certain GPA or something? Um, are there outliers in this? Yes, of course. Not everyone is going to fit into the cookie cutter mold. But when I was applying to pharmacy school, I would also look at the statistics of an average applicant and think, will I be somewhere around that range? Is this a reach for me? Will my interpersonal skills be carrying me throughout this application?
Mhm.
And hopefully my personality will shine, which in that case, sometimes it does for sure. But yeah,
Great advice. I would echo what Valerie has said. I think, funny enough, like I was thinking when you were speaking, when I was applying to colleges from high school, the idea was like, it's competitive. Like I need to increase my chances. And so for me, like I fell into that trap of thinking like, oh, like I'll apply to as many schools as I can and like have backups, because it's important that I get into a college. And that could be true. Everyone has like different life pathways, looking back. But as I get older, I realize too that you should be selective because not every program's going to fit what you want, and you're not going to fit every program's needs as well. So I think you should consider everything that Valerie has mentioned, and really judge how well a program can provide for you to reach your career goals. That should be one of your ultimate end goals is how well you feel like this program can prepare you for what you want to do. Another question that we got was, do you have any other tips for someone in their second year of undergrad to prepare for applying to pharmacy school? Generally speaking, like application wise, that started in our third year, like summer-ish, and then you go through the whole application process, interview in your fourth year, and then like by towards the end of your fourth year or last year of undergrad where you're going to be going for graduate school. So for someone to be thinking about this in their second year of undergrad, I think like kudos to you. Um, there are a couple things that I can think of to recommend, but I'll defer to Valerie to see what her thoughts are on this.
yeah. So whoever wrote this question in, congrats on starting everything so early. I feel like even in my second year of undergrad, I didn't even know what I wanted to do quite yet. I knew that I wanted to be somewhere in healthcare. I just wasn't quite sure what that looked like for me. Um, one tip I really have is to go through each school that you're interested in applying to, look at what their requirements are, because even though they're all pharmacy schools, they may have different types of credits that you must get through classes. For example, one pharmacy school needed for us to take a public speaking class. And this really confused me because I was like, what am I going to be doing? You know, a pharmacist is not going to be a TED talker. But at the end of it, I learned a lot. And I feel like all of those skills really came into play when I was in pharmacy school, was talking to patients and also talking to faculty.
Mhm.
Um, but that's one very niche example. Some other examples, some pharmacy schools require you to take anatomy, some don't. So think about all those things, especially while you're still so early in your college experience. you have time to fit these classes and these requirements into your schedule so that last minute you're not scrambling and trying to figure out, oh my gosh, how am I going to take this public speaking class in time before I start my school? Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. In the previous episode, I also mentioned kind of trying to reach out to pharmacists in different areas and conduct like informational interviews. That way you really understand what you're going into. I've known people who went through like majority of their pharmacy school year and realized that it wasn't for them. And I think that's perfectly fine because sometimes like life turns out that way. But like one way that you can really figure out if this is the career for you is to really get that insight as soon as you can. And so I think this early on in school is the perfect opportunity for you to be exploring different types of career pathways. If you're set on pharmacy, that's great. Maybe you can use that time to figure out what specifically in pharmacy that you're interested in.
Definitely. So that's actually really great advice, not only for incoming pharmacy students, but also incoming pharmacy residents. So all of these skills of preparing yourself to apply to pharmacy school, I think definitely roll over into what you want to do postgraduate. Alina mentioned something really valuable about having these informational interviews with people. And for anyone who's applying to residency, I highly recommend you do that as well. I mean, I don't know if it's going to be successful because I'm not quite there yet. I'm still in my application process, but that's something that I have been trying to do myself in terms of finding one resident, maybe ex-resident, maybe current pharmacist who did a residency at the institution I want to go to, and really just have an open, honest, candid opinion, or I'm sorry, candid conversation about their opinions.
Mm,
Lots of pharmacy students end up going to these state and also national conferences to try to network and try to talk to these residents and see what they're doing. Because as much as you want to fit into a program, you want the program to fit to you too, right? But at all of these conferences that you go to, um, typically the RPD, which is the residency program director, is right behind their back. So of course they're not going to be, they may not be 100% honest about any weaknesses about a program. Having a one-on-one, an informational interview can really open that door and try to see what areas of the program really align with you and what don't align with you. And that's also translational to the to applying to pharmacy school too. And it may be kind of hard to find someone who goes to that school or in the program that you want to be in. I think a good start would be to look at the school's social media, and likely they'll have like some student spotlights, or some students will be commenting or being tagged in these pictures. That's an easy way to try to um, locate someone in a position where you want to be in and try to connect with them. LinkedIn is great too, but speaking from personal experience, I don't check my LinkedIn DMs. I think a lot of people don't either because we kind of get those sponsored messages all the time. But yeah.
great tips. I'm a huge advocate of LinkedIn though, so reach out if you have any questions about that. But I think especially these couple of months, like November, October, November, December, like are when a lot of those national pharmacy conferences happen. So take advantage of that. Are you going to mid-year, by the way?
Yes, I am. I'll be there in December in New Orleans, Louisiana.
Yeah, exciting. So I'm sure Valerie's going to get a lot of great experiences there. So last question that I received I thought was interesting. And it might take us a little bit of thinking to answer is if I'm planning to take a gap year from undergrad to pharmacy school, what advice do you have to continue building my resume to be a strong candidate? So I didn't take a gap year. I'm not sure. Did you take a gap year, Valerie?
I did not
Okay.
take a gap year.
But that's okay. I'll start first with like some of my thoughts on this, and you can add on. But I think this is relatively actually much more common than you might think. Taking a gap year between undergrad and pharmacy school, sometimes it could be like finance, sometimes it could be family reasons. But I think ultimately during that year, you should still be focusing on what you would have been focusing on while you're applying. So, whether that means taking more extra classes that are relevant to meeting like prerequisites for pharmacy school. I know some people who decided to pick up like pharmacy technician jobs. And so at least they were still working in within like pharmacy and getting some experience from that. I also know other people who said, I want to travel during that gap year. And that's totally fine because what they ended up doing was traveling and going on mission trips to other countries to volunteer for like health clinics. And I think those are all very valuable experiences and can speak to your character and how much maybe you are passionate about healthcare. And I think those can all go well into your application going into pharmacy school. And frankly speaking, I think a lot of my pharmacy school classmates who did take gap years in between, they have so much wisdom and different types of experiences to share. And so I find it very valuable. If I were like the pharmacy school, I think it's so valuable to have such like a diverse background of students with different experiences. And it really shapes what kind of healthcare professional you are and like you want to be post pharmacy school. So that's just kind of like my thought. I think there's a lot of things that you can do to continue building your resume up.
Definitely echo everything Alina just said. I'm not necessarily speaking from experience because I kind of jumped straight from undergrad to pharmacy school. However, in pharmacy school did take gap years, and during this time, it's a great opportunity to not only take more classes that can fulfill the prerequisites. If they don't fulfill the prerequisites, if you just take science classes at your local community college, it can also increase your science GPA as well. Some of my friends who are on their current gap years right now actually applying to other professional schools such as med school or PA school or anything of that sort. Um, they're also using this time to trying to increase their science GPA if maybe it's not exactly where they want it to be. Alina mentioned another thing of maybe taking up a pharmacy tech job. I think that's a great option. Um, and there's a lot of settings you can do this in. You can do this in a retail community setting, which is kind of like a Walgreens, a CVS, a Safeway, those types of pharmacies or Costco. But there's also inpatient experiences as well, where you may be a technician in a hospital that runs 24/7 and seeing the production and distribution of drugs in a hospital. Um, that could be really valuable. I also want to bring this up because I'm a first generation, not only American, but also student in my family. But navigating grad school can be very challenging, especially financially. I don't know about you, but I would rather come out with as little loans as I can because it's expensive and you're going to have to pay it back eventually. So I think when you do take on these jobs, it's also a great opportunity for you to try to stabilize yourself financially because when you're in school, you may work, but you also may not work. There are some people in pharmacy school I knew who did not work during that time, and that's totally okay. You do not need to. But if you think you may not work, it's a good idea to try to set yourself up to be financially successful. So at least that's one less stress you have while you're going through some pretty tough years.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I know I mentioned like picking up a job within pharmacy, but even like a job that isn't in pharmacy, I think there's definitely ways that you can get certain skills out of it that you can really showcase during your interview and application process. And I think when I was going through the application process, pharmacy schools, a lot of the programs I applied to, like I asked specifically because I used to have a lot of random side hustles and jobs that I worked that weren't related to pharmacy at all. I was like, does this detract from my application? And generally the answer is no, because it shows that maybe you had other things going on in life that you just didn't have the opportunity to engage in something that was more pharmacy related, and that's okay. Um, so I just wanted to put that piece out there. But yeah, I think those are all the questions that I got from social media and emails. I appreciate you helping me answer those. For listeners, feel free again to send in more questions for future episodes. I hope that this has been insightful for you, and look out for the next episode, which I will be inviting some more guests to reminisce reminisce on pharmacy school times with me. And thank you, Valerie, again for appearing on this podcast and giving such valuable insight. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in. As a reminder, if you like this, feel free to subscribe, leave reviews, and follow us on social media. Is there anything that you want to say before we end the episode, Valerie?
Thank you so much for having me on. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn. I know I said I don't check my LinkedIn messages, but now after this, I'm going to start checking. But yeah, feel free to reach out.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you next time.